Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to give it a couple minutes just to let folks log in and make sure that everyone is settled into the webinar. So hang tight with us for just a couple minutes and then we will go ahead and get started. But thank you all so much for being here. Alrighty, once again, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being with us. We're going to give it a couple more minutes just to let folks come in and log in and make sure everyone is settled. There's going to be quite a few of you, so I'll give it a couple extra minutes just to make sure everyone can log in properly. So hang tight. We'll get started in the next couple of minutes, but thank you all so much for being here. Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're excited to host this webinar for you. Our attendees numbers are still rising, so I am going to give it a couple extra minutes just to allow folks to log in and make sure everyone is settled in properly. There's going to be quite a few of you, so it might take a couple extra minutes. So feel free to hang tight, and then we'll get started here very shortly. Alrighty, folks. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. For those that just logged in, I'm going to give it about one more minute just because those attendee numbers are still rising. There's about 1,400 people in this webinar right now. So I'll give it about one more minute just to make sure folks can log in, and then I'll go ahead and get started on the information. But thank you all so much for being here. Alrighty. Seems like folks are starting to trickle in and numbers are steadying. So I'm going to go ahead and get started just for the sake of timing to make sure I can get all the information to you as I possibly can. Good evening, good afternoon, good day, whatever time zone you're in and wherever you are in the world, it is good to have all of you here. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Jessica, and I am an admission officer here at UC San Diego. This will be my fourth admission cycle with UC San Diego. So I'm excited to be here with all of you and give this information, hopefully, to give you some sort of guidance on your next steps or your students' next steps in this process. This is for the words are difficult, parent and family prep for On Track to Triton Life. So this specific webinar is guided towards parents and guardians or support systems for current applicants. So hopefully your student has applied for fall 2026 admission, and you might be asking a lot of questions about what are the next steps. We want more information, so hopefully we can deliver that to you tonight. But before I go ahead and dive deep into the content, I wanted to just take care of a couple housekeeping things before we get started. Probably one of the most popular questions we'll get tonight is this webinar being recorded? And the answer is yes, it is being recorded. So a copy of the recording will be available on our undergraduate admissions events page located under the resource section of our website. There is also a Zoom Q&A feature to submit your questions during the webinar. We have a mighty team behind the scenes that will help answer these questions throughout the entire webinar, and I'll also try and answer some at the very end as well. Just know that there is currently almost 1,500 of you in this webinar, which is absolutely exciting and amazing. So due to time constraints, we may not be able to answer or address every single question during the session. We will try our very best, but know that it's possible we might not get to every single question. For any unanswered questions, though, feel free to reach out to the undergraduate admissions department after the event is over via the Contact Us form located on our undergraduate admissions website under the resource section. So if you do have a question, feel free to use that Q&A feature, which you'll find in the toolbar in the Zoom room. So feel free to use that during the webinar. And then if you are interested in closed captioning, you can also enable that by clicking on the live transcript icon in the Zoom toolbar. So automated captions are available by selecting the show captions button. So that's something that you can enable if that's something that you're hoping for in the specific webinar. But now that that has been taken care of, let's go ahead and dive into the content and what you're probably hoping to hear during the webinar, right? So your student has probably applied, and it's a really exciting time. I know that students work really, really hard on their applications. And so now there's probably a lot of questions about what are the next steps and what does that look like? So we'll go over a few things like application timeline for what's next, different things to talk about in the application, the applicant portal, just some information about the university. So hopefully you all can be prepared and supporting your students in this application journey. All right, so when a student submits an application, it's a really exciting time, and I get a lot of questions about, well, what's next? What does my student have to do? What do they have to look out for? And so one of the most important pieces of information that they will have access to is their applicant portal. So after the student applies, they will be receiving an email to create their applicant portal. So students will be prompted to create a username and password to access their applicant portal. As always, I usually recommend people to write this information down somewhere because it is really important that you are able to access your applicant portal because it has a lot of important information for the student. So all communication is conducted via email to the address that the student used on their application. So a lot of questions I get specifically from parents, families, support systems is how can we support our student throughout this entire application process? And one of the most common things I say is encourage your student to check their email because a lot of information is delivered via email. So it's always important that the student consistently checks their email throughout the entire admission process. And whatever email that the student used on their UC application is how we're going to communicate with them, right? So please encourage your student to check their email. I also get a lot of questions from students of if we can communicate with them a different way, like text message or any other way, phone call. And the answer is the most common way that universities communicate is via email. So that's going to be a really important thing that the student has to do throughout this entire process, even into after they find out their admission decision. So that's going to be a really important factor there. So through their applicant portal, they can also change their intended major selections and or college rankings through January 31st, 2026. I'll go way more into detail about that in a little bit, but know that they can update that information in the applicant portal. And also other information such as mailing address or personal information can be changed in their UC application, and then it'll be updated in the applicant portal itself through there. And then UC San Diego holistically reviews and then provides admission decisions via the applicant portal. So I also get a lot of questions about, well, how are students going to find out their admission decision? Where do we go to find that information? And the student will find out their admission decision through the applicant portal. So that's why it's super important for students to have access to the applicant portal and check their email, because that's where they're going to find out their admission decision, which is a super exciting time. So that's definitely something important to keep in mind and encourage your student to look out for that information. And so we got a lot of questions when you all signed up for this webinar, and we got to see the amazing questions that you all submitted. We got a lot of questions about the review process and what do we look for in applicants and what does holistic review mean? So I'm just going to dive deeply really quickly into a little bit about what we're looking for in terms of first year requirements, right? So UC San Diego does partake in a holistic review process. So there are a total of 13 different factors that we take into consideration for admission, right? And one thing, you may or may not be aware of this already, but we do have something that's called A through G coursework, which essentially determines how many years of a certain subject a student has to take, which you can see on the screen here, right? So A is history. Students have to complete a minimum of 2 years of high school history. B is English. Students have to complete a minimum of 4 years of high school English. And the list kind of goes on from there. The UC website has much more detail about A through G coursework if you want to take a deep dive there. But that's kind of the gist of it. So we are looking at all of that A through G coursework, and students have to earn a C or better in all of those A through G coursework. And then in terms of GPA, students have to earn a minimum of a 3.0 GPA or better to be considered if you are a California resident, and then a 3.4 GPA or better if you are a non-California resident. So that is something to keep in mind as well. And then that is also what we can call the UC GPA, where we take a student's 10th and 11th grade weighted coursework and combine those 2 years into what's known as your UC GPA. Doesn't mean we don't take a look at 9th and 12th, because we still do, because we want to make sure that you're still meeting admission criteria, right? But know that in terms of the UC GPA, those are the main 2 years that we look at in terms of that. And then UC San Diego and the entire UC system is test free, meaning we do not take SAT or ACT scores into consideration for admission. So you do not need those test scores to be eligible, right? And a lot of students ask me, well, can I still send them? Will you still consider them? Is that something that you all take a look at? And the answer is no, we do not consider that at any point in the admission process and is not a factor that we take a look at. So students cannot send us their SAT or ACT scores during the application review process. Students can send those test scores after they're admitted to the university for class placement. So if you earn a certain score in the math section of the SAT, for example, it might place you into a higher math course, et cetera, et cetera. So if your student is accepted to the university and they want to send us those scores for class placement, they can do so usually after they accept their offer of admission. And so, like I said, there is a total of 13 different factors. So there are other factors that we also take into consideration, which you might have seen when the student was filling out the application, right? So things like academic rigor and achievement. So is the student taking advantage of the AP, IB, or honors level courses at their particular high school? And then any honors or awards that the student might have received, which you might have seen in the awards section when filling out the UC application. And then any extracurricular activities, right? So clubs, sports, organizations, internships, volunteering, jobs, any of those things we will take into consideration as well, and all that participation outside of the classroom. Any talents that the student might also have, we can consider on the application. And then there is a portfolio for students that are applying as an art major on our campus. And then also there is the personal insight questions, which is like the essay portion of the application, if you will. So students had to answer 4 out of the 8 questions with a maximum of 350 words per question. So that's our chance to get to know them as whole human beings outside of their grades and their extracurricular activities, right? So UC San Diego doesn't have time to interview all of our applicants because we get so many as every year, as you'll see in a little bit. But know that that's our chance to get to know the student a little bit better. So it's all those factors tied into one, into the application. So that's what we're currently reviewing when we're reading a student's application, is all of those different factors. And then if a student is applying as a transfer, so if there's any students out there or parents and families that are supporting transfer students, know that the requirements for them are a little bit different than if you're applying as a first-year applicant, right? So there's specific requirements that students have to meet, right? So they have to complete a minimum of 60 UC transferable semester or 90 quarter units. They have to have a competitive GPA. We usually recommend a 3.0 or higher in UC transferable courses in order to be considered competitive. And then they also have to complete a requirement that's called 7-course pattern, which usually consists of 2 English courses, 1 math course, and then 4 courses from 2 out of the 3 areas, which is arts and humanities, physics and biological sciences, and social and behavioral sciences. And then if a transfer student is interested in one of these majors listed on my screen, those particular majors require specific major preparation courses to be completed prior to transferring. And there's a whole page on our website that specifically lists what courses are required in order to transfer into that particular major. So if you're interested in that, feel free to take a look on our website. But that's the general gist of all the different requirements we're looking at when we're considering a transfer student's application. We also do take a look at the other factors as well, such as any extracurricular activities, and also transfer students do still have to answer the personal insight questions. There is one required question for transfer students, and then they have to choose the other 3 that they would like to answer out of the different prompts. So it is a little bit different than first year, but that's the gist of all the different requirements if you are applying as a transfer student, right? So now jumping back to talk about the applicant portal. So this is where you can review, or the student can review, their applicant information to below for accuracy. So one thing that I always point out to students is the UC application ID number. That's a very important piece of information for the student to have on hand, because let's say you reach out to our office, for example, and you want us to take a look at your application, or, say something is wrong or you're having issues accessing your applicant portal or anything like that. Having your UC application ID on hand will help us look you up in our system, so that way we can help you accordingly. And that's for any UC campus that you would reach out to, right? So having that information on hand is going to be really helpful. But looking at your name, birth date, and email as well. So if your student's not sure or they don't remember what email they used in the UC application, they can look at their applicant information and find that information there. If they want to update this information, they would have to go back into the UC application and update it there. I know there's not a ton of information the student can update at this point now that the applications are submitted, but this is the information that they can update if needed. So that's how they would do that. And so it'll also give you a little message on the bottom that says, please log in to your update to update your UC application, so that way the information is updated accordingly. All right. So I also get a lot of questions about, oh, I found out about this particular major. Is there any way for me to update that information now that the application is submitted? And as I kind of mentioned before, the answer is yes. Students do have the option to update their major or alternate major choices in their applicant portal up until January 31st. So if the student wants to go back in and update those majors for consideration, you can definitely do that up until January 31st. And that goes for both first year and transfer. So you can go back in and change that information if they would like to. So know that you can find that in the applicant portal if that's something that the student is hoping to do during the application process. And so we did get a lot of questions about majors and what was available and how to get more information about that. So we do have a lot of different options for students to choose from. We have over 160 different majors at UC San Diego over across 10 different academic schools. So it's a lot of amazing and different programs that students can consider when wanting to attend UC San Diego. Something I get a lot of questions about is what's called a selective major. So you can see on my screen there is a list of selective majors, and essentially what that is those majors tend to be the most popular on our campus, right? So they tend to be a little bit more popular in our applicant pools, so we have to limit the amount of students that we enroll into those particular majors every for that particular year because they can sometimes change from year to year. This year, our selective majors include data science, public health, and most of the majors in the Jacobs School of Engineering, which does include computer science. So my recommendation usually to students is to put an alternate major for consideration. So that way you are considered for multiple majors at UC San Diego to almost increase your chances of admission to the university. So if you are interested in, or if the student is interested in one of those selective majors, hopefully they put that selective major as their primary or first choice, right? And then put a non-selective major as your alternate or second choice. So that way you can be considered for multiple majors. So during the application process, we will consider you for your first choice major, right? But if you don't meet selection criteria for that particular major, then you may be considered for your alternate choice, right? So that is definitely something that the student can do. So after this webinar, if you happen to talk to your student and they didn't put an alternate major for consideration or they didn't know they were applying to a selective major, feel free to have that conversation with them. And then they can always go back into their applicant portal, like I said, and update their major choices if that's something that they want to do. My amazing team dropped some links in the chat, so thank you so much. You can find more information about the different majors on campus and the selective majors through those links that were dropped in the chat for you all. I don't have time to go through all 160 plus majors. I wish I could, but those resources will definitely give you a lot more information if that's something that you or your student would like to dive deeper into. Alrighty. So in the questions you all submitted, we got a lot of questions about the college system, right? So what is it? What does that mean? Can my student change the college rankings that they put? So we got a lot of different questions about that. So as I mentioned, for switching or choosing different majors up until January, students can also change their college rankings in the application. So students can log back into their applicant portal and change those college rankings. Or if your student elected to not rank the different colleges and now want to go back and rank them, they can absolutely do that as well up until that same deadline of January 31st, 2026. So students can rank their top 4 choices in the application. So you might see on my screen that we have an example here of student choosing their top 4 choices. So that is definitely something a student can do in the application process specifically for UC San Diego. And so we did get a lot of questions about, well, what is the college system? What does that mean? What does that look like? And so hopefully I can give you all a little bit more information about it so that way you can share it with other family members or even your students as well. So the college system is really unique to UC San Diego. There really aren't too many universities that operate on this system, but from all the students that I worked with, a lot of students really, really like the college system. So hopefully your students will as well if they end up attending UC San Diego. But you can think of UC San Diego as the large umbrella or the large university, right? And it's broken up into those 8 different colleges. A lot of folks compare Harry Potter to our college system. So if any of you are familiar with Harry Potter, you can definitely think of this analogy where there's Hogwarts University, right? And then they have the 4 different houses within Hogwarts. And it's kind of a similar thought process here where like UC San Diego is like Hogwarts, and then there's the 4 different colleges, AKA houses. So the thing that makes them distinct amongst each other or makes them different is something that's called a general education pattern or your GE pattern. So students have to take classes in their major right, to graduate. But students also have to take classes outside of their major in order to graduate as well. So, whatever college the student is placed into is going to determine the types of classes a student takes outside of their major. So, you can be any major in any college. It really has nothing to do or any ties to a student's particular major. It has everything to do with classes that a student is taking outside of their major. So, for example, if a person is more into math, science, or STEM courses, for example, maybe they'll pick a college that has a little bit more of that STEM curriculum built into it, like Revelle College, for example. Or if a student is more into writing, social science, arts, or humanities courses, they may pick a college that has more of that in its curriculum, like Eighth College, for example. So it's nice because it can give students a say in terms of what types of classes you want to take versus me just handing a giant list of requirements and saying, here you go, you have to take this to graduate. Have fun with it. So it is a little bit unique, and a student can choose their own journey based on which college and curriculum they like best, right? So that's why we encourage students to do a little bit of research and seeing which college or curriculum they like best. So that way, you can rank them accordingly in your application. And our amazing team again is dropping links in the chat as well. So if your student wants to go in and do a little bit more research or just learn more about the college system, you can definitely find resources there. Another nice thing about our college system is that each college has its own set of resources. So they have their own academic advisors, student support services, they have housing, honors programs, student life activities, and events. So that way students are not fighting 35,000 students for one particular resource, and it helps a large university feel a little bit smaller. So that way a student doesn't feel like a very small fish in a very giant pond, right? So it's a really cool system. And also note too that each college has its own physical neighborhood on campus. So if you're walking around UC San Diego, you'll see the Warren neighborhood, you'll see Mirror, 8th, 7th. Each one has its own physical neighborhood on campus. So if a student comes in as a first year applicant, whatever college they're placed into is also going to determine which college neighborhood they will be living in, if you will. If you are a transfer student, there is transfer student specific housing. So you will be living in that particular housing if you choose to live on campus. But again, students are not required to live on campus, but that is something that is available to you. And then we also do have that 2-year housing guarantee if it is something that you want to take advantage of, and majority of our students do live on campus. So that is the gist of the college system. So again, if your student wants to do more research and get more information about the colleges, or they decide, oh, I actually want to do rank my college preferences, you can definitely have them switch those or choose to do that up until January 31st. So feel free to encourage them to rank the colleges if they haven't, or do some research if they haven't already. A, a, a very popular question I get a lot of the time from both students and families is, does my admission decision contingent upon my college rankings? Is it going to have any weight in my decision on if I'm admitted or not? And the answer is the college rankings have no say in your admission decision. So if you rank one college over the other, it's not necessarily going to increase your chances or, make you more likely for admission. It really has no say in terms of your admission decision. It is purely based off of the student's preference. So it has no weight in your admission decision. So don't stress about that, and feel free to rank the colleges, encourage your students to rank the colleges as you see fit and accordingly, right? And so I also get a lot of questions about, can we send this information? Is there anything that we can send or do after the application is submitted? And the answer is UC San Diego specifically does not take any supplemental information into consideration, anything outside of the UC application. The only thing that we're going to take into consideration is what the student actually puts into the UC application. So please do not send us any updates to the application, including any extracurricular activities, awards, or personal insight questions. We are not accepting those at this time. Any mid-year transcripts unless they're specifically requested. So sometimes students will send us transcripts for consideration to the university, and we will not take a look at those unless the university specifically requests the student for them. So please don't send those as well. We also don't take into consideration letters of recommendation, resumes, cover letters, any writing samples or research papers, or letters of continued interest. So that is supplemental information that we do not take at any point in the application process. So if you do try to send them to us, we will not take that into consideration. So I ask that students hold off from sending this information because we will not take it into consideration, as I said, at this time. So feel free to encourage your students to not send it to us unless there's information specifically requested, but that is extremely rare. So at least for UC San Diego specifically. So hold off on sending that information because we will not take a look at it during the actual application process. So I want to go over the timeline as well because we got a lot of questions about like when are we going to hear back? When are you going to release admission decision and all of those things? Hopefully your students applied 10 days ago now or 11 days ago because the deadline was December 1st to actually submit the UC application. You all were probably aware of that already. But now that the students have submitted it, we are in the thick of reviewing applications and then in the following year. So for seniors, if you applied as a first year student, in March 2026 is when you're going to find out if you have been admitted to the university. And then first year students will have until May 1st to decide if they would like to attend, if they are admitted to the university and accept your offer of admission. For transfer students, you will find out by the end of April if you've been admitted to the university, and then you will have until June 1st to decide if you would like to attend and accept your offer of admission if you are admitted. A lot of people ask me, well, do you have a specific date in March or April? Do you have any information about a specific date? I don't have specific dates within those particular months about when specifically admission decisions will be released. It does vary every year, but I promise your students will find out if you've been admitted by the end of March and April, respectively, depending on if they applied as a first year or a transfer, right? So I recognize March feels very far away and April as well, and it's only December, but I promise it will fly by and it'll be here before you know it. And again, students will get their admission decisions in their applicant portal. So that's where they're going to find out if they've been admitted to the university or their admission decisions as well. And so we also get a lot of questions about, well, what's the admit rate? How many applications do you all receive? What does the wait list look like? And how does that work? So hopefully I can give you all a little bit more information about that here. Keep in mind, these numbers are for fall 2025 admission because obviously we're starting our fall 26 admission process. So we don't have numbers for that this year. But these numbers are for students that started on our campus this fall. So for first year admission for fall 25, we received 136,700 applications for first year admission. We are the second most applied to a school in the country, so we do receive quite a few every year. We admitted about 38,000 of those students, so that resulted in a 28% admit rate. And the middle 50% or average GPA is between a 4.12 and a 4.29. And that is the UC GPA that I was talking about earlier when we were talking about the first year admission requirements, right? So that is what that looks like for fall 2025 admission, just to give you all some sort of context into what that looked like the year prior. And then, as I said, we got a lot of questions about the wait list. So what if my student is waitlisted? How does that work? When are we going to hear back and all those different things? So in March, if your student receives a waitlist decision, you can opt into the waitlist, right? And usually they can opt in as soon as their admission decision is delivered. And so they can opt into the waitlist usually in the spring. And then once that May 1st deadline passes, usually is when if there is any waitlist activity, we start seeing that usually sometime in the summer, because then we'll know how many students accepted our offer, what placements we have still, and how much room we have, and all those different things. There's a lot of different factors to consider, right? So usually, if a student is admitted off of the waitlist, they usually have or hear back from us sometime in the summer, but usually by the end of summer for sure. So last year for fall 25 admission, we had about 21,000 students opt in to the wait list. And then we admitted about 4,000 of those students from the wait list. So approximately 10% of first year admits were from the wait list. So there is usually some movement of the wait list. Again, it can vary year to year based on how many students are admitted off of that wait list. So what we usually recommend for students that are on the wait list is to accept an offer for another university, right? In case you don't get off of the wait list. So we usually encourage students to do that. And then if you are admitted off of the wait list and you decide to come to UC San Diego, you can withdraw your offer from the other university that you accepted and then come over to us and accept your offer off of the wait list. And usually that happens sometime in the summer, like I said. So that's what that looks like for the year prior. And then for transfer students, I'll share the numbers as well. So last year we received around 23,400 applications for fall 25 admission for transfer students, and we admitted about 12,300 of those students, which resulted in a 52% admit rate. And the middle 50% or average GPA was between a 3.55 and a 3.94. So those are what the numbers looked like for transfer students. And then also for the transfer wait list, we had about 4,000 students opt into the wait list, and then we admitted about 1,100 of those students from the wait list for transfer. So the numbers are a little bit different, but just to give you all context about what that looked like for transfer students as well. And as far as the transfer waitlist goes, it's the same usual timeline. So after that June 1st deadline, if there is any movement off of the wait list, students will usually hear after that point because, again, we'll know how many students accepted our offer, if we have any space, and all of those different factors, right? So they'll usually hear back in the summer as well about any waitlist activity, and all of those updates will be delivered via their applicant portal as well. All right. And then of those questions that you all submitted, we also got a lot of questions about financial aid, right? So hopefully I could give you all just a little bit more information about it, and give you all some resources if you do have very specific questions about financial aid packages and all those different things. So on my screen is a snapshot of the cost of tuition and attendance for the 2025-2026 school year. So you can definitely take a look at that on my screen. And then just know that if your student is not a California resident, there is an additional non-resident tuition amount, and that is listed at the bottom of the screen as well. So you can kind of see, and it can vary based off of the student's living situation, right? But one thing that I think is really important for parents and families to know is the tuition stability plan. So this applies across the entire UC system, right? Not just for UC San Diego specifically, but there is a system-wide tuition stability plan where whatever year that tuition price is for the first year the student starts at the university, right? That tuition price will stay the same for up to 6 years of undergraduate study. So that specific tuition cost will stay the same from freshman to senior year, for example, or if you're a transfer student from your first to second year. So your tuition price specifically won't keep increasing the more time you spend at UC San Diego. So that's really nice. So that way you and your students can actually plan how much money you will be spending on tuition, right? And that way you know your tuition price won't keep increasing the more time that you spend here. So that's a good thing to consider. And then also know that campus-based fees may still change from year to year, but know that that tuition price will stay the same up to 6 years of undergraduate study. And these numbers are all before financial aid and scholarships, right? So one specific thing that I want to mention that hopefully you all will be aware of now is something that's called the Blue and Gold Opportunity Plan. And basically, what this plan is for most California families that earn up to $100,000 a year, receive enough grant and scholarship funds to cover their UC tuition. So, with an average package, financial aid package price of around, students usually receive around $22,000 a year, that will help cover a lot of those specific costs. But if you do earn up to that $100,000 a year, you will receive enough grant and scholarship funds to cover that UC tuition. And our amazing team just dropped a link in the chat for you all, so that way you can learn more about that if you are interested. But a lot of students and families ask me, well, how do I get considered for this? How do I get considered just for financial aid in general? What does that look like? And the answer to that question is the FAFSA application. So hopefully most of you may have already heard of the FAFSA application, but for those that haven't, it stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. So this is how students are automatically considered for grants and scholarships at UC San Diego. And if a student is not eligible to fill out FAFSA, but they are AB 540 eligible, they can fill out the California Dream Act application in place of FAFSA. We tell folks not to fill out both. It's either one or the other. So you should fill out the FAFSA application, but if you're not eligible for FAFSA but are AB 540 eligible, that's when you'll fill out the California Dream Act application. Around 70% of students receive some type of financial support at UC San Diego, so hopefully your students will as well. So the submission period for the FAFSA application is happening right now. So the application is open, and students will have from October 1st to, usually the priority deadline is March 2nd to actually submit the FAFSA application. Keep in mind that March deadline is sometimes subject to change, as it's changed a little bit in the last couple of years. So just maybe something to keep on top of. But the usual priority deadline is March 2nd. I usually tell students and families the sooner the better in submitting your FAFSA application. So if you haven't submitted the FAFSA already, I encourage you to work with your student to maybe fill out this application in order to get considered for that financial aid. So even if you don't think you're going to receive anything, even if you don't think you're going to get any funds, I still recommend filling it out to make sure that you're not leaving free money on the table, right? And there's all different kinds of aids that your student may be eligible for. So usually how it works is, if your student is admitted to the university, along with that admission decision and your acceptance letter, the student, if they have an application on file, specifically the FAFSA application, usually they'll receive something that's called your CFP, or your college financing plan. And that usually lets students know how much aid you're receiving, what the out-of-pocket cost would be, so that way you and your student can make an informed decision about if the institution is going to be the best fit for you financially as well. So that's typically how that works in terms of financial aid. If you do have any specific questions about financial aid and scholarships, we do have an amazing financial aid and scholarships office. Us in the admission office can try and answer some basic questions about it, but if you do have very specific questions about it, I know they have an amazing team in that office that can definitely answer more of those complex questions as well. And then, if you all have questions for us, so I know there's quite a few of you in this webinar, so thank you so much for being here. But if you have additional questions after the webinar, or if there's a question that you thought of that didn't get answered, you can always reach out to us. We do have a contact form that you can reach out to our office. You can also give us a call with the information on our screen. And we are usually open Monday through Friday. So we'll try and answer those questions and kind of guide you along that process. And that can, always apply even after your student receives admission decisions, right? We're here for you. We know this can be kind of a stressful process at times. We know it's a lot of information. So we are always here to help you all and your students and answer any questions that you all have. And know that we are always willing to answer those questions specifically. And then also as well, this is our final webinar for the fall term, but we do have a lot of exciting events coming up in the spring as well. So on our events page, there is going to be advertised spring events. So if you would like to attend other events in the spring, or if your student's really interested in attending some, know that we will be posting those pretty soon here, maybe at the start of the new year after the holiday season as well. So feel free to look out for those as we have a lot of exciting things like our Triton Days, for example, which is our open house that we host every April for usually admitted students for first years and prospective transfers. So know that that's an exciting event that you can come to if you are accepted to the university. But we do have a lot of spring events that you can definitely access as well when they're posted. And then we did host other webinars earlier on in the fall. And like this webinar, we do have those recorded as well. So if you would like to go back into our website and under the resource tab, if you want to go to event recordings, and then take a look at those and watch some of the other webinars that our amazing team did, you are more than welcome to do that as well. I've done a couple webinars, like Q&A with an admission officer and other things as well. So if you would like to watch those, or if you want to encourage your student to watch those, if they want more information, they are more than welcome to do that as well. So those are hosted there if that's something that you're hoping for. And then know that we will have specific recordings for this webinar as well there too. All righty. So thank you all so much. I know there's a ton of questions in the chat, so thank you all so much for using the Q&A feature. Feel free to keep submitting those questions. I do have about 14 more minutes, so I'll try and answer some of these questions live, so that way we can get those questions answered if you are interested. So feel free to submit those questions to the Q&A feature. Our team will also work behind the scenes to try and get those answered too. But my team is feeding me some questions that I think they want me to answer live. So I'll go ahead and answer some of those right now. Is housing for first years guaranteed? The answer is yes. So if you want to live on campus, like I said, students are not required to live on campus, but if that is something that they want to do, they do have a 2-year housing guarantee. The only caveat or thing that a student has to do in order to get that guaranteed housing is to submit your housing contracts and apply for housing and submit all of your paperwork on time. But as long as a student meets all those deadlines and fills out all the appropriate paperwork, they will have guaranteed housing their first 2 years. And then another question I see is, does UCSD admit by major? If not, does that include selective majors as well? So for admitting by major, we do take major into consideration for a student's admission decision. So the answer is yes. So we do, and that's usually why we encourage students to put more than one major for consideration, so that way we can consider you for multiple majors. For a first-year student, they can be considered for their first choice, their second choice, but then if they don't meet selection criteria for that, but we still want to admit them, they can be admitted as an undecided or undeclared major. And then for transfer students, they will only be considered for their first choice and alternate major, because we do not admit transfer students as undecided or undeclared. So that's why I usually tell students to put more than one major for consideration if that's something that they would like to do. So another question I see is, our school does not rank students. So if two students are almost the same GPA, like 4.63, for example, versus 4.65, how will they be evaluated? So this is a good question. And what I usually tell students and parents and families as well is we evaluate a student in the context of their environment. So I don't necessarily have multiple applications and I'm comparing multiple students, right? So all those different factors that we talked about, or that I talked about when talking about first year admission requirements. So things like the UC GPA, are they taking advantage of the opportunities that are in front of them? And that's basically what I mean by evaluating a student in the context of their environment. So are they taking advantage of the AP, IB honors level classes, right? Are they taking advantage of opportunities outside of the classroom, right? So things like, extracurricular activities, jobs, internships, and all those different things. And also their personal insight questions, right? Which is also something that we take into consideration. So there's a lot of different factors in there, right? So that's a really good question. And I usually tell folks, I'm not going to compare a student in San Diego County to a student in Washington State because those opportunities are so different and the environments look completely different, right? So we really are evaluating students in the context of their environment. All right. Another question I see. So tuition will be the same all 4 years if my daughter is at UCSD. Does that apply to all UCs? So the tuition price that I was talking about for the tuition stability plan, yes, that price is going to stay the same all 4 years. Usually a student is at UC San Diego if they come in as a first year student or up to 6 years, right? And as far as I'm aware, that does apply to all UC campuses. So that tuition stability plan applies across the entire system. Um, and like I mentioned as well, the campus-based fees may vary year to year and may vary by campus. So that's also something to take into account, but that base tuition price will stay the same throughout the entire 4 years that your student would be here if they are um, at UC San Diego. Does UCSD have a film major for first year students? I believe so, yes. So the links that we dropped in the chat earlier as well for the Y majors link also has a lot of different options. So you can definitely take a look at all the different programs that we have if that's something your student wants to take advantage of. All right. Another good question. Is it mandatory to rank the colleges in the application? The answer is no. The student does not have to rank the colleges. So in the UC application, it asked students if they were applying to UC San Diego if they would like to rank the colleges or let us know their preference, and they can click yes or no. So they don't have to, but it is something that I do recommend just because we want to know the student's preference, right? And we will place the student based off of those preferences. So if the student chooses to not rank the colleges, they will be placed into one of the 8 colleges, based off of where there's room and all those different assignments. So if they don't let us know their particular rankings, then we will place them accordingly. But if the student wants us to know their preferences, that's usually where we go to those college rankings and we try our best to place them into one of their top choices for the college rankings. So it's not mandatory, but it is something that I highly recommend. All right. Does UC San Diego students or does UC San Diego consider students who are under a 4.0 GPA? And the answer is yes. That's a good question. So that GPA range that I showed earlier, that 4.12 to 4.29, that is our middle 50%. So what I usually tell students and families is we admit above that middle 50%, right? And we also admit below that middle 50% all the time. So we do consider students that are under a 4.0 GPA. So as long as they meet that minimum GPA, they are eligible to apply. And we do read every single application that comes to UC San Diego, right? Also know too that we are a competitive institution, so students do go above and beyond the minimum, but we do consider students that are under that 4.0 GPA. So that's a good question. All right. That's another good question. When is the due date for submitting the forms for housing and or dorms? So that process starts after a student accepts their offer to the university. So that is a common question I get of like, well, do we apply for housing now? What does that look like? Do we have to start filling out those forms? And so that process usually starts in, I would say, mid-May for first year students and then mid-June for transfers. So the housing application process doesn't start until after a student accepts their offer of admission. So you don't have to do anything at this moment to apply for housing, but you will have to start that process usually early summer. And all of those deadlines will be communicated to the student via their email and applicant portal. So once the student, if they're admitted, goes in and accepts their offer to the university, they will also get access to the housing application after they accept their offer. So that usually starts sometime in the early summer. So you don't have to stress about it right now. But just so that way you know there is going to be additional things that the student will have to do after they accept their offer. Are all colleges located close to each other? So walking distance, for example. For me, yes. I do work on campus, so the colleges are pretty close to each other in terms of walking distance. It is a large campus acreage wise. So I do think that there is a lot to explore, but the colleges are pretty close to each other. So I would say maybe it's about a 5 minute walk from, or maybe even a 2 minute walk from one to the other. And something that I usually tell students as well is a student is not confined or restricted to just their college neighborhood. So, like, let's say if they're living in Muir, for example, they can go to any of the other college neighborhoods and eat in their restaurants and go to their shops and also attend the different events. So, if they're in Muir and they want to attend an event in Marshall called Marshallpalooza. They're definitely available and they can do that as well. So they're not going to be restricted to just their college neighborhood. And also, they will be taking classes in all of the different college neighborhoods and buildings because there's also classrooms within those neighborhoods as well. So they're pretty close to each other. There is definitely a lot to explore, and the campus is pretty large, especially when you first visit. But I promise the more time a student spends there, the smaller and smaller the campus seems, definitely. Does undecided major impact decision process? I'm assuming the admission decision process. So in terms of, you know, a student's admission decision, like I said earlier, the major is going to be a factor, or we do look at major when considering a student's admission decision. So, whether a student applies to, a selective major or undecided or undeclared, that we are going to take a look at that in the admission decision process, right? But it's not necessarily going to hinder the student if they are an undeclared major. So if the student really is unsure about what they want to do, and they want to just come in as an undecided major, they can definitely do that. What I usually tell students is, and my recommendation for them is to put the major that you're really interested in and see what happens. Because you never know what's going to happen in the application process unless you put your name in the hat or in the applicant pool. So I usually tell students put what you're interested in, and then you can definitely go from there because you don't know what's going to happen unless you put what you're really interested in. All right, we did get quite a few questions, and I'm seeing some questions from my team about study abroad. Is that a thing? Are they allowed to do that? Can they do that? And the answer is yes. So they can study abroad. There's actually quite a few different options for students to study abroad at UC San Diego. We have programs in over 70 different countries. So that's definitely something that your student can take advantage of as well. They can go anywhere from a week to 2 weeks to a summer to a quarter or up to a full year. So that's definitely something that they can do. We do have a specific study abroad office on our campus where they can work with students and looking at all those different options for students to take advantage of. So if your student is interested in studying abroad while they're at the university, that's definitely something that they can do. I studied abroad in Italy while I was in college, so that was the most amazing experience. So if your student really is interested in studying abroad, I highly recommend taking advantage of that opportunity as well, because it really is an amazing process. I do see a question about ELC. So ELC stands for eligibility in local context for those that are not familiar. But if your student goes to school in California, you might be familiar with that. If a student is guaranteed top 9% in the state of California and they only applied to 5 UCs, do they get guaranteed to one of the schools they applied to or any UC? So if a student is part of the ELC program, then they are guaranteed admission to at least one UC campus, right? So if there is a chance maybe that the student may not be admitted to a UC that they apply to, but if that is the case, so let's say a student applies to, UC San Diego, UC Santa Barbara, and UC Irvine, for example, and they are not admitted to any of those campuses, but they are a part of the ELC program. The UC Office of the President may reach out to the student and say, "Hey, we see you're a part of the ELC program. Here's admission to this UC and you can accept your offer if you're interested. So it's not necessarily a guarantee that they'll be admitted to at least one of the schools that they apply to, but they are guaranteed admission to at least one UC campus. So hopefully that helps. I think I have time for one more question, so this will be my last question. Um, After students get accepted, can you change majors? So this is a good question. For majority of the time, students can change majors to a non-selective major on our campus. So you can change majors to a non-selective major if that's something the student wants to do. If the student is interested in applying or switching to a selective major, the student can't necessarily just switch into it, right? So if they're trying to switch into a selective major, they have to apply to switch into it. So it's not necessarily a guarantee that they will be able to switch into that selective major. That is a very small group of majors. It's maybe 10 or 15 majors out of 160 different options. So there's still a lot of flexibility there if the student would like to change majors, but that's what that looks like. Alrighty, I think our hour is up. So thank you all so much for being here and for dedicating time in your busy schedule to support your students through this application process. Like I said, if you did not get your questions answered or if you have any additional questions after the webinar, feel free to reach out to the admission office and we will definitely get those questions answered for you. But we hope that you have a great rest of your day or evening, and thank you so much for joining.